Our planet is This year, our planet remained an average of 1.5 degrees Celsius above its core temperature range for the whole year. That's a threshold we were previously aiming to keep under to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Add to that the fact that we're in a sixth mass extinction event, our soils are dying, billions are in poverty, and, things are looking pretty dire. All of this can, in fact, be traced back to one main cause: our economy. Most of us are already aware that an economy based off infinite growth is going to end up killing us and our planet. But what are our alternatives? Are any of them actually viable, and could they improve our lives? Jason Hickel, in his book Less is More, states, "All living organisms grow, but in nature there is a self-limiting logic to growth. Organisms grow to a point of maturity, and then maintain a state of healthy equilibrium. When growth fails to stop, when cells keep replicating just for the sake of it, it's because of a coding error, like what happens with cancer. This kind of growth quickly becomes deadly." Well, this very same logic can be applied to capitalism. Capitalism is an economy organized around constant GDP growth. GDP, or gross domestic product, being the way in which we measure the monetary value of finished goods and services. In this way, capitalism is a cancer. It requires exponential and unlimited growth, which is going to end up killing its host body, our planet. Capitalism, unlike nature, doesn't self-limit. Under capitalism, global GDP must keep growing by 2 to 3% each year, and that's exponential. According to Hickel, keeping to a yearly growth of 3% means doubling our economy every 23 years, and again 23 years after that, and again, and so forth. And as our growing economy is directly tied to our energy and resource use, you can see how this kind of infinite growth just does not compute with our finite planet. Our planet is already straining under the stress of consumption it's under today, but in 100 years' time, our global GDP would have to be 16 times greater than it currently is now. And that's really hard to imagine. Of course, a lot of sustainability bros, TM, now talk about green growth as an alternative to our current unbridled capitalism. But green growth assumes that GDP growth can be permanently decoupled from our resource use and emissions, at a pace that's fast enough to solve both our climate and ecological problems. Yeah, the only way that would really be possible is with magical decarbonization technologies that don't really exist, at a pace faster than scientists deem possible. And as for decoupling GDP growth from resource use, that would require switching to a service-based economy. An economy based on providing services rather than manufacturing goods, which many sustainability bros TM advocate for. Sure, a lot of high-income countries are already progressing to a more service-based economy. Some claim that the domestic material consumption of these countries is actually decreasing, even as their GDP continues to grow. But in reality, these countries are merely importing more from other countries, and their material footprint per capita is still the highest. And realistically, services still need materials to function. More people watching streaming services like Netflix? Well, that's going to need larger servers to host the streaming services on, which is going to require more resources. Even tourism is classed as a service, but even that requires more planes, boats, hotels, and attractions, which all need manufacturing. So all in all, capitalism, even in its sustainability bro TM form of green growth, will always require more resource use, which will always output more emissions and encroach more on our ecosystems. Add to that capitalism's link to colonialism and its very nature incentivizing human rights violations like wage theft or child and slave labor. And it's fair to say that it's a bit of a disastrous system for both planet and people. But of course, for those few millionaires and billionaires who actually own the capital itself, the factories, tech companies, etc. But most of us here probably already know this. Now, I'm not going to spend a long time dissecting how capitalism originated. Maybe that'll be a separate video, but I just want to briefly talk about markets. Markets were around for a long time before capitalism, but capitalism itself is actually a market economy. This is where goods and services compete with each other, and in theory should lead to a fair playing field, but in reality leads to a clusterfuck of companies leeching off areas with lower taxes or worse labour laws to try and monopolise the market and eliminate all competition. But capitalism isn't the only market economy that is possible. There are others, such as market socialism, where your means of production, such as factories, are owned by the community as a whole. In practice, this might look like workers' cooperatives or the state owning factories and farms, but the goods produced from them still going onto the market, with profits generated going back towards remunerating employees or back into the public good. Whilst I do believe this could definitely be an improvement to our current system, I don't really think it pushes the boat far enough in reimagining what a solarpunk economy could look like. Also, I feel like the very presence of markets still incentivizes competition and overproduction, which doesn't really help to solve our more environmental problems. In fact, I think we really need to push further in imagining a world with an economy that is free of hierarchy, free of the state, and maybe even moneyless. Because here's the thing, even if the concept of markets and GDP and means of production completely fly over your head, like they do to mine most of the time, I'm sure most of us can agree on one thing. We're all tired of the system, tired of watching it destroy the planet, tired of buying things that we know are made by people who are mistreated and are just going to break after a few uses anyway, tired of having to work for the majority of our lives just so companies can keep growing a profit, just in order for us to survive. So what are the alternatives? Well, a lot have been proposed and most of them do overlap or fit into each other. Here are just a few that I think are worth exploring for a solarpunk economy. The circular economy is an economy we could adopt to tackle our overuse of finite resources. Now, whilst I don't believe that the circular economy itself is holistic enough to be our ultimate final version of a solarpunk economy, I do believe it could better help us to manage and use resources. Simply put, the circular economy is what it sounds like. An economy which prioritizes the reuse and circulation of resources to avoid waste and over-extraction, rather than the very linear economy we have now of acquire a resource, use it, and bin it. For anything biological, this could mean reinfusing the used resource back into the ecosystem, such as through biodegradation, and for anything technical or chemical, this could mean recirculating the resource back into the economy again, such as through recycling. In fact, there are several key components of a circular economy which I believe could be integrated into a solarpunk economy. 1. Prioritizing using regenerative resources. This means ditching things that are difficult to recycle, reuse, or biodegrade, such as single-use plastics, and ditching non-renewable energy sources, such as fossil fuels as well. 2. Keeping these regenerative resources in the economy for as long as possible. This means waving goodbye to planned obsolescence, a despicable capitalist practice of designing objects to last a very short amount of time so people have to keep buying more of them, thus increasing a company's profits. In addition to making sure that objects last a long time, this could also mean making sure that if they do break, they are easily repairable. Machines and technology being upgradable would also increase their lifespan. Perhaps building these in a modular way would allow people to switch out older parts for newer ones without replacing the whole thing. 3. Eliminating waste as much as possible by recirculating it as a resource. Once a regenerative resource has been used as much as possible, recycling it or otherwise dismantling it back into its base parts to be transformed into something new is key. There are also secondary values of a circular economy that could be a natural part of a solarpunk economy. For example, sharing items through tool libraries or similar so less has to be produced, and circulating nutrients through ecosystems so that food can be produced more efficiently, such as through permaculture. I think it's important to note, though, that the circular economy is highly susceptible to being co-opted by capitalists. In fact, sustainability bros TM have been jumping on the circular economy hype to defend green growth, stating that if we can close the loop in the way we produce and recycle resources, the main environmental problems associated with our ever-increasing resource extraction will be solved, meaning we can continue to make things and churn a profit. Even the Ellen MacArthur Foundations, one of the original think tanks all about the circular economy, has become, very dubious. They have a whole page on their website focusing on financing the circular economy, which focuses on growth, lowering investment risk, and offering the finance sector a global growing market and multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. And let's not even mention their strategic partners page, because yikes. So how can we push the circular economy to go even further and think past the limitations of capitalism? It's all good having a closed-loop circular economy for our resources and energy so that we eliminate waste, pollution, and carbon emissions. But if we don't decouple this from the profit motive, we're not really addressing social issues like wealth inequality, or the fact that, most people just don't want to be working most of their lives just for a company to keep churning a profit. We need to eliminate the profit motive from our world. And how do we do that without causing a crash and burn financial crisis? Well, through degrowth. According to Hickel, degrowth is a planned reduction of excess energy and resource use to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a safe, just, and equitable way. This could help us focus more on an economy centered around well-being, to reduce wealth inequality and poverty, and ensure everyone has a meaningful life. We could even ease into degrowth slowly, starting right now, by focusing on degrowing some of our worst industries, such as fossil fuels or weaponry, and instead reinvesting in things such as renewable energy, healthcare, and regenerative agriculture. Because degrowth doesn't just mean stopping all progress. Humanity is always going to want to innovate. But this innovation should focus on our needs and desires, and not what's going to make the most profit for shareholders. Degrowth does require a pretty substantial shift, because simply stopping GDP growth in a growth-oriented world triggers a recession, which usually hits working-class people the hardest. But when we purposefully center our economy around well-being and meeting people's needs and desires, GDP growth just doesn't matter anymore. There is no more profit motive. We can produce, use, and recycle resources in a circular loop in a way which most benefits individuals and communities, and that doesn't require infinitely scaling up profit. Even in today's world, research has shown that beyond a certain point in high-income countries, increasing GDP no longer increases well-being. Of course, part of degrowth must involve cancelling the debts of Global South countries and letting them catch up to the level of high-income countries. But for countries like the UK, we don't need our GDP to grow anymore. We don't need any more profit. Centering the well-being of humans and nature is of course a core tenet of solarpunk, and degrowth starts to weave this narrative together, linking it in with the circular economy to start to build a picture of what exactly a solarpunk economy could look like. But I still feel like there's a key thing missing here. A core question: how do we get to this point? And how do we make sure this lovely utopic economy in this lovely utopic world doesn't get co-opted by someone who just wants to make a little bit of cash? Well, some people say the answer is in a state driving forwards degrowth and circular economy policy and legislation. Maybe this is a socialist state. Maybe markets still exist, and maybe, no. I don't really believe that degrowth and a circular economy could be a part of how and why we manage and distribute resources if hierarchy still exists. Because there will always be an incentive for someone somewhere to use others to better their own life. And that will probably come in the form of buying and selling in a market, and then growing in profit, and then, well, you know the rest of the story. Hence why neither degrowth or a circular economy as standalone ideas are going to solve all of our global problems. But there is one thing that might. It's called... Imagine your ultimate solarpunk utopia. What does it look like? Maybe we're all wearing funky clothes made out of mycelium which can biodegrade quickly once they're worn out, thanks to the circular economy. Maybe we all have way more free time to spend playing medieval tunes on a flute, thanks to the degrowth economy. But what about how we actually distribute food, how we make decisions, how all of this utopia sticks around? What if the next Elon Musk is born and wants to use all of our circular tech to fly to Mars? How does any of this actually come together, organise itself, and remain feasible? Well, that's a lot of points, and the answer, I believe, lies with the solidarity economy. The term solidarity economy was originally developed and originated in Latin America and other parts of the Global South, and encompasses many different definitions. Principally, it is both a strategy to build a post-capitalist world, as well as a model for how that world could look like. The solidarity economy, rather than just focusing on resources and energy, like the circular economy, or shifting focus to well-being over profit, like the degrowth economy, is a holistic model made up of grassroots and participatory democracy, worker self-management, and ecological regeneration. In fact, a major component of the solidarity economy is the grassroots and participatory democracy. Importantly, for a solidarity economy to function, relationships should be horizontal and without hierarchy. This allows communities to self-organize and build power autonomously away from both the state and capitalism. But what are the tools that a solidarity economy would use to make sure everyone got what they needed, in a world with neither the state nor capitalist markets to regulate resource distribution? 1. Production. This is how resources and goods are produced in a horizontal way by self-managing workers, to meet the needs and desires of communities. Under a solidarity economy, these would usually be produced by a cooperative, an organisation which is owned and run jointly by its members who each have an equal say in decision-making and benefits. In the solarpunk world, this could include collective farms, community gardens, sustainable factories, renewable energy cooperatives, 3D printing collectives, and more. 2. Distribution method. This is the how and how resources and goods are produced and distributed. There are many different solutions here. Recently, for example, I joined my local mutual credit network where the local currency is palms and people give or accept them on an online system when trading skills. This is a totally made-up currency. Everyone starts with 0 when first joining, and everyone is allowed to be in credit too. So for example, if I was to help someone in my community to film a video, then they might give me 10 palms, and then maybe 2 weeks later, I want to get help from someone else to plant potatoes, and they might give me 20 palms. Now, while this is a great way to trade skills outside of our current capitalist system, personally, I would rather a solarpunk economy doesn't rely on markets anymore at all. And this is where mutual aid comes in, where resources and services are exchanged voluntarily and collaboratively for common benefit. And mutual aid, when scaled up, can turn into the gift economy, an economy where resources are given freely without the person or group directly giving them expecting any reward or exchange. Gift economies have in fact already existed throughout our world in non-market societies, which is pretty cool, and shows that they have been feasible in the past and potentially could be feasible again in the future too. 3. Distribution and consumption. Now that the resources have been produced and the method of distribution has been selected, how will these resources actually be consumed? Well, in a solarpunk society, I believe that physical spaces or buildings, such as community health centres, community media, tool libraries, repair cafes, community food hubs, and more, could all be used as physical spaces to consume and distribute resources. After all, we live in a world of abundance, where lots of people have different goals and skills and purposes in life. With technology to help us assess the needs of different communities, we should have enough to go around and make sure no one is wanting. And the great news, the solidarity economy can be built in the here and now. Lorenzo Comboa Irvin, sorry if I mispronounced that horribly, a former Black Panther Party prisoner, once said, "So we need to go beyond just helping, to working towards some sort of different economy, a survival economy. In some parts of the world they call it a solidarity economy, to help them survive capitalism. Whatever it's called, we need to have that so we're not totally dependent on the capitalist state." With a solidarity economy, we don't just have to wait till we finally get to a solarpunk utopia before starting to build the systems and processes we want to see. Of course, the idea of prefiguration, building the new world out of the shell of the old, is something I've already covered extensively in a previous video linked up here somewhere if you want to go watch that. But housing cooperatives, workers' cooperatives, community assemblies, squats, reclaiming the commons, time-sharing schemes, and even informal babysitting groups are all tools we can use to start building up networks of solidarity through our communities right now. And if we add to that sustainable production and waste management through the circular economy, as well as focusing away from profit and towards well-being with the degrowth economy, I think we've got a pretty good, sustainable and adaptable economic model to take us forwards into the future. Don't you? So ultimately, what does a solarpunk economy actually look like? Well, I think we'll only really know when we get there. But I, for one, see a world without plastic or fossil fuels. A world based on reusable, repairable and modular resources and materials. A world running on clean energy. I see a world which doesn't run on profit, but where individuals within communities autonomously focus on well-being. A world where money doesn't exist. A world with no state or hierarchy. A world where people redistribute resources as needed with the assistance of technology, so that no one is ever without. I see a world where the most hated and boring tasks are automated, leaving humans with plenty of leisure time. A world where everyone has their voice heard when it comes to decisions impacting their community and on a wider scale. Tell me, what do you see when you picture a solarpunk economy? Let me know in the comments down below. See you in the next one. Bye!